The story of Ruth and Boaz is one of the most beautiful and significant narratives in the Bible, a testament to faithfulness, kindness, and the wisdom of a man who exercised shrewdness with noble, God-inspired intent. Boaz exemplifies a person who, even when presented with a remarkable opportunity, acts with patience, integrity, and prudence. His relationship with Ruth demonstrates that wisdom and respect are essential elements in true love and in building a life firmly based on God's will. Together, Ruth and Boaz reveal the value of honor, trust, and a commitment to doing what is right, showing that faithfulness and determination are always rewarded by the Lord. Ruth's story begins with a decision made during a time of hardship. Ruth was a Moabite, a foreigner who had married into an Israelite family. Her husband, along with his family, had come to Moab during a time of famine in Israel. Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, had left Bethlehem with her husband and 2 sons, seeking refuge and sustenance in Moab. However, after years in Moab, Naomi's life took a tragic turn. First, her husband died, leaving her a widow in a foreign land. Later, both of her sons died as well, leaving Naomi with only her 2 Moabite daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah. It was a time of deep loss and sorrow, as Naomi had not only lost her family, but also faced an uncertain future in a foreign land with little hope of provision or security. In the midst of her grief, Naomi decided to return to Bethlehem, her homeland, having heard that the Lord had provided for his people there and that the famine had ended. Before setting out, Naomi told her daughters-in-law to stay behind in Moab, where they could return to their families, remarry, and rebuild their lives. Orpah, after much sadness, chose to stay, but Ruth made a surprising choice. In a display of profound loyalty and love, Ruth insisted on staying by Naomi's side. She declared, "Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God my God." Ruth's choice to stay with Naomi and to commit herself not only to her mother-in-law, but also to the God of Israel demonstrated a heart of sincere devotion, compassion, and faith. Ruth and Naomi returned to Bethlehem with little more than each other, facing uncertain times and financial hardship. In that era, widows were often left vulnerable without means of support, relying on charity or, as was common in Israel, gleaning in the fields to collect leftover grain during the harvest. Ruth, determined to provide for herself and Naomi, set out to glean in the fields, gathering the scraps left behind by harvesters. Her work was humble and exhausting, yet she approached it with a spirit of dedication and humility, eager to contribute to their survival. Unbeknownst to her, she had chosen to glean in the fields of Boaz, a man of integrity and wealth, who was also a distant relative of Naomi's late husband, Elimelech. Boaz soon noticed Ruth among the gleaners, her work ethic and commitment catching his eye. He inquired about her, and upon learning of her background and her loyalty to Naomi, he was deeply moved. Here was a foreign woman who, despite her hardships, had left her own people and chosen to align herself with the God of Israel and the people of Israel, taking on the challenges of living in a foreign land for the sake of her mother-in-law. Boaz admired Ruth's faithfulness and her willingness to take on menial labor to support Naomi. It wasn't only her beauty or her youth that impressed him, but her strength of character, humility, and devotion. He was inspired by the sacrifice she had made and the resilience with which she faced her struggles. Boaz responded with compassion and generosity. He instructed his workers to ensure that Ruth had ample opportunity to gather plenty of grain, even advising them to leave extra sheaves behind for her to collect. Boaz also warned her not to glean in any other fields, providing her with protection and assurance of safety under his care. This kindness wasn't limited to material provision, but extended to the way he treated Ruth with dignity and respect, acknowledging her worth and showing her that she was valued and welcome in his fields. In doing so, Boaz demonstrated the love and kindness of God toward those in need, especially toward those who, like Ruth, were considered outsiders. Ruth continued gleaning in Boaz's fields throughout the harvest season, grateful for the provision that allowed her to care for herself and Naomi. Over time, Boaz's consistent kindness and integrity established a bond of mutual respect and admiration between them. Naomi, seeing Boaz's attentiveness toward Ruth and knowing his role as a potential kinsman redeemer, a close relative with the right to redeem a deceased relative's estate, and, in some cases, marry the widow, began to consider the possibility of a future between Ruth and Boaz. Naomi developed a plan that, while bold, was culturally understood and respectful. She suggested that Ruth approach Boaz at night during the threshing season, while he was resting at the threshing floor after a day of hard work. This plan was unusual by modern standards, but, at that time, symbolized a humble request for protection and provision. Ruth's actions were not those of seduction, but a respectful appeal, signaling her willingness to accept Boaz's protection and to see if he would act on his rights as a redeemer. Ruth, demonstrating faith and obedience to Naomi's counsel, waited until Boaz had fallen asleep and then quietly lay at his feet, a gesture of humility and an expression of trust. When Boaz awoke to find Ruth at his feet, he was startled, yet he quickly understood the meaning of her actions. Ruth was asking him to consider fulfilling his role as a redeemer, offering her the shelter and security that would come from marriage. Boaz's response was one of integrity and thoughtfulness. He was honored by Ruth's gesture and acknowledged her respectability, but he also knew there was another kinsman closer in line to Naomi's family who had the first right to redeem. Rather than impulsively acting on his feelings or the situation, Boaz promised Ruth that he would handle the matter fairly and respectfully. He assured her that, no matter the outcome, she and Naomi would be looked after. This restraint showed Boaz's commitment to justice, honor, and respect for the law, as well as his desire to ensure that their relationship was built on a foundation of trust and transparency. The next day, Boaz approached the closer kinsman redeemer to discuss redeeming Elimelech's land, presenting the option of marrying Ruth as part of the redemption. Initially, the kinsman agreed to redeem the property, but upon learning that it involved marrying Ruth and possibly jeopardizing his own inheritance, he declined. This left Boaz free to fulfill the role of redeemer for Ruth and Naomi. Boaz's approach was both wise and honorable, respecting the customs and laws of Israel, and ensuring that all was conducted with dignity. With this resolution, Boaz formally took on the role of redeemer, marrying Ruth and thus providing for her and Naomi, restoring their place and security within Israel. Their union was more than a simple marriage. It was the unfolding of God's divine plan. Ruth and Boaz's story demonstrates that when we trust in God and live with integrity, He directs our paths and fulfills His purposes in ways that far surpass our expectations. Ruth, a foreign widow who had chosen faith over familiarity, found a home, a family, and a purpose in Israel. Boaz, a man of noble character and unwavering faith, was blessed with a partner who shared his devotion and integrity. Together, they built a family that would shape the course of biblical history. Ruth and Boaz became the great-grandparents of King David, establishing a lineage through which the Messiah, Jesus Christ, would come. Their lives serve as a testament to God's faithfulness, showing how He can work through the most unlikely people and circumstances to accomplish His redemptive plan. The story of Ruth and Boaz teaches us many lessons about faith, loyalty, and the importance of following God's guidance. Boaz's approach to Ruth reflects true love, a love that is patient, honorable, and wise. He didn't rush or take advantage of the opportunity. Instead, he waited for the right moment and followed the proper steps, demonstrating that true strength lies in submission to God's will. Boaz's shrewdness was not used to gain personal advantage, but rather to fulfill God's purpose and protect those who needed care. His actions won Ruth's heart, not through force or manipulation, but through integrity, generosity, and kindness. For us, the story of Ruth and Boaz is an invitation to live with the same wisdom, faithfulness, and respect for God's principles. Boaz teaches us that, even when opportunities arise, we should approach them with prudence and a desire to honor God's standards. Ruth, on the other hand, exemplifies humility and unwavering faith. She faced numerous challenges, but chose to trust in the God of Israel and dedicate herself to living according to his will. Together, they show us that God honors those who seek righteousness and that, even when circumstances seem uncertain, he is guiding each step toward a greater good. May we learn from Boaz and Ruth to live with wisdom, faithfulness, and trust in God's timing. May we find the courage to follow God's guidance, even when it means waiting or navigating challenging paths. Their story is proof that God always has a greater plan and that he uses even the most unexpected situations to achieve his purposes.